Okay, so political ideology, or public opinion rather, our second lecture on that. First lecture talked about public opinion polling, how it's done, how you get information about people's views about public opinion, the way to actually do that and to get accurate results that seem to be realistic and accurate and not just overgeneralizing from too small of a group or from an unrepresentative sample. Now we'll talk about, first of all, political ideology. Again, public opinion, what do people believe about politics? What is ideology? What does that mean? What influences people? And then kind of what we know about from public opinion polling and so on, how people vote, what motivates them, okay? So what is ideology? Ideology is a set of basically coherent or consistent beliefs about politics, policy, things like that, that shape somebody's policy, or they're basically their political attitudes and their actions as a political actor, a voter, a citizen, whatever, okay? Ideology is very different from partisanship, okay? Partisanship is loyalty to a particular political party. Ideology is a consistent set of beliefs. We kind of associate particular ideologies with one party or the other. We think of, excuse me, conservatism as an ideology that we kind of maybe associate with the Republican Party, liberalism as an ideology that we might associate with the Democratic Party. But sometimes really consistent ideologues do not make very good partisans because they don't want to compromise on what they think are really the crucial ideological questions for the sake of partisan advantage, right? Sometimes you have to compromise in politics, obviously, and someone who is a real ideologue might recognize that. They may recognize that this is a situation where compromise is necessary, but they may not, or they may just not feel comfortable identifying with a party that is not ideologically clear or pure, or if you want to be negative about it, rigid enough for them, okay? So ideology is a basically consistent set of beliefs, okay? Maybe ideology is not always as consistent as a theory or a philosophy, but it's much more consistent than just supporting one party or the other, okay? So political ideology, a set of more or less basic coherent beliefs that people use to judge policy, to judge particular politicians, parties, whatever, okay? And it's a set of beliefs they use to interpret and make judgments about political life, okay? That's what ideology is. And of course, there's a question: how much does it really influence anything in politics? How much are people really influenced by ideology rather than other things? Okay, so a classic study of voting behavior, The American Voter, published in 1960, asked people a series of questions. Excuse me, these were many questions, right? They didn't just ask them, are you a Nature of the Times voter? And then if they said yes, they counted them. They asked them a whole series of questions trying to understand what did they actually vote, what did they look at, what did they actually base their votes on, okay? Only 12% of the respondents to this study were actual ideologues. In other words, only 12% of the people actually voted on the basis of a consistent ideological position, okay? 42% of the people, the vast, not the majority, but by far the largest group, were group benefit voters, okay? Those were people who were voting based on the benefits they expected for their group, whether they were a union member or a wealthy person or a person in this or that industry or a member of this or that group. They voted based on what they expected in terms of benefits to a particular group, whichever group was most significant for them in political terms, or at least in terms of the benefits they thought they could get for politics. And again, remember, this is right in line with Federalist 10. Remember, this is what Publius says will happen. Most people will be motivated in politics by benefit for themselves. In fact, that's why they'll form factions. That's why they will act in politics at all, is for some benefit to them. But of course, an individual benefit, very hard to get in politics. You have to join with other people and seek a group benefit that will come to you all. So kind of what we might expect based on the Federalist Papers and so on, okay? 42% group benefits voters, 24% were Nature of the Times voters, okay? These are people who voted based on how good the Times seemed to them, how good things seemed to be going. If things were going very well, the economy, if the economy was doing well, country was at peace, things seemed to be generally happy and prosperous and safe and positive, they tended to vote for the incumbents. If things seem to be going badly, the economy is bad, food rations, there's an unpopular war, they vote against the incumbent. So these are people, again, they don't have an ideology and they're not necessarily motivated by specific benefits for them or for groups they're part of, and therefore for them, they're motivated by how well things seem to be going generally with the country, okay? And they vote based on that. 22% no issue content voters. This is either party loyalty or personality. We'll talk about, when we talk a little bit more about voting, when people are voting on the basis of personality or candidates, it can be something as superficial as somebody is charismatic or telegenic or whatever. There's also a view that voters are actually making somewhat sophisticated appraisals of a candidate's ability to deal with things. And so it's not just a question of who looks better on television or you know, some kind of aspect about somebody's personality being charming or whatever. There's some kind of assessment about why they think that this person will be a better president or senator or governor or whatever than the other person, okay? So it may not be as just totally superficial and vacuous, but it's no issue content. It's not ideology. It's not group benefit. It's not about the nature of the times. It's either they vote a straight party line, or there's something about the personality or some kind of personal assessment they're making of the candidates they vote for, okay? So not quite 50% group benefits voters, about a quarter nature of the times, 20% no issue content voters, and only a little bit over 10% ideologues, okay? They did an updated version of the study published in 2008. The sample was taken in 2000, okay? So basically at the end of the 1990s and before September 11th, before the Iraq War, before all of those events, right? So it's not published until 2008, but the sample was taken in 2000, almost a different world. So basically kind of asking people about how they voted, you know, in the 80s and 90s. 20% of the people said they were ideologues. So a clear growth in the number of ideologues, okay? More than 50%, now a quarter of the, or now a fifth of the population votes apparently as ideologues. 28% group benefits voters, huge decline, right? It was 42%, now it's 28. So a 14% drop off. Why? Is it because they don't, some of these members of some groups don't see benefits, they don't see that they're being helped very much? Or do people, for whatever reason, that doesn't motivate them to vote? It's a little hard to tell. But 28% nature of the times voters, maybe not shocking. The 1990s, sort of an unparalleled period of economic peace, economic growth, prosperity, peace abroad, the end of the Cold War, right? I mean, maybe people were really impressed by that. Maybe they're really thinking, boy, you know, how well things have been going, how good the times have been. That's really been influential here. Again, who knows? We'd have to do it again now to see. 24% no issue content voters. That's up just a little bit, but basically the same. So there are far fewer group benefit voters, jump in ideologues, and somewhat significant, you know, decent rise in nature of the times voters. Again, 1950s also a good decade for the United States, but you know, 1990s even better. Maybe that has something to do with it. 24% no issue content voters. So you see, even then though, a fifth of the people are ideologues. So most people are not voting on the basis of ideology. They may have a consistent ideology, but that's not the basis for their voting. However, again, this sample goes back to 2000, okay? Here it is in the graphs, the breakout. You can kind of see the way that it's grown, the way that it's changed, which parts have grown and which parts have shrunk, okay? But even so, even with, you know, again, that's 2000, okay? 20% of the people saying that they're ideologues. One of the big stories that people have seen in the past, you know, 10 years, maybe a little bit more, is increasing polarization, okay? To some extent, you see it even in 2000, more people were voting as ideologues than they had in 1960, okay? But you see, and these are from the Pew Research Center, you basically can see what happens with polarization in the public as a whole. More and more people being ideologically polarized, okay? And that means that, you know, here you see in 1994, a lot of these people are here in the middle, right? They hold a mixture of liberal and conservative views. This is sometimes referred to as cross-cutting cleavages. The idea that the cleavages, the differences and disagreements in society, they cut across each other. So that if you disagree with somebody on, say, whether or not marijuana should be legal, you agree with them on gun control or on foreign policy or on immigration or whatever. The notion that if you find out that somebody believes one thing on one question, a neighbor, a coworker, an in-law, you might still agree with them on a lot of other things. So that disagreement, political and social disagreement, is not absolute, okay? And one of the things that started to happen is that more and more you have fewer of these cross-cutting cleavages, and more people tend to, if you find out what they believe about one thing, you start to think, well, I probably know what you think about everything else too. That the cleavages start to, everybody kind of goes together, and there's much less societal cohesion, and much less of that cross-cutting of that kind of not simple right down the middle cleavage of people into two groups, but people into a lot of different groups based on opinions. What has tended to happen, fewer people have this mixture of opinions here in the middle, okay? As you see in 1994, big chunk here in the middle. 2004, okay, you can see it's dropping off some, and by 2017, the median is, right here, and there are far fewer people, a bit more people consistently liberal, far fewer people consistently conservative. Of course, some of this, again, is that how they're voting, though? They may have this ideology, but does the ideology actually motivate them to vote, or is it something totally different? Is your ideology consistently liberal, but you make $300,000 a year and you vote for Republicans because you want a tax cut, right? If you're a group benefits voter. Also, of course, who actually turns out to vote? People may have consistently liberal ideologies, but if they're not voting, then the consistent, and even if we have far fewer people who are consistently conservative, if the voter turnout is higher among these people for whatever reason, then you're going to see that Republicans, conservative politicians, whatever, will do better. So, the fact that we see that this is how these public opinion polls are saying this is how the different opinions are distributed in society, that doesn't necessarily predict election results. In fact, it obviously doesn't. By 2017, it sort of does. 2018, Democrats did well in the midterm elections, okay? 2020, overall, Joe Biden won the presidency. Democrats tended to underperform in a lot of congressional elections. So it's not as simple. Of course, that was 3 years later. Maybe things have changed a little bit. But again, you can see the Democrats and the Republicans more ideologically divided. So here we are by party, right? The median Democrat, the median, in other words, just to make it simple, the average, the middle kind of Republican or Democrat, where are they? You can see in 1994, they're relatively close together. 2004, we start to have, they're pulling apart a little bit, or you see they're kind of more on these sides, but they're still pretty close. By 2017, you see the median Democrat is much further to the left, the median Republican much further to the right, and you see the overlap is much less, okay? There are not that many areas where there's overlap between the Democrats and the Republicans on, again, kind of in general. Okay, obviously you'll need a Democrat who, believes most of these things and has a couple of Republican policy positions, and vice versa with the Republicans. But you see the overlap is, the median, the average, the kind of middle point is far further out here or out here, and there's far less overlap in the middle there, okay? And you see, again, it's kind of interesting to see in 1994, not only was there a fair amount of overlap, but it kind of drops off. The drop off is much steeper here by 2004, and then there's much less, okay? So public opinion, that tells us, we've talked about how we figure out what the public believes through polling, how you actually get an accurate poll, how politicians use polls, and now ideology, public opinion, what do people believe? What is ideology, but also how effective is it in actually motivating people to vote? Is that what they're actually doing? And there's not necessarily a ton of evidence that that's what they've traditionally done, but again, clear evidence, which we see other signs of all the time in the media, on social media, all kinds of places, of this increasing polarization, this sort of intense polarization, which for the most part has, mostly negative, but largely undeniable effects.